Hello and welcome to the shop. Today I've got a really special project for you. Hey Michael, how you doing?
All right, how you doing, Bob?
I'm doing all right, brother. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Hey everybody, this is a buddy of mine, Michael DeLawter. Mike is the guy that really helped me out when I got started in casting, and he still spends a lot of time answering questions for me when issues come up with casting. What can I do for you, Mike? What's going on?
Well, I've got a little surprise for you.
All right, I love surprises.
Last time I saw one of your videos, I saw you were doing a bespoke pen.
Olive wood, yeah.
Out of olive wood, and you were having some trouble with the threads.
Okay.
And I was wondering what would happen if you used a stabilized blank.
Okay.
So I took some Spalted Hackberry that I had and stabilized it for you.
Oh, wow, thanks a lot. Check this out, guys, a little Spalted Hackberry. It's about 1 inch by maybe about 8 inches. And that is going to make an interesting pen. So guess what? Today's project just changed. We're going to start working on a bespoke pen out of stabilized Hackberry. Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Here's a closer look at that Spalted Hackberry blank that Michael DeLawter dropped off. This is pretty sweet. Take a look at it. Now you can see I've already got it marked for a body, a section, and a cap. So that should let you know right there what we're going to do with this today. It's an absolutely gorgeous blank. Just look at the grain in that. It's going to look amazing as a pen. I've got the blank chucked up in my pen jaws, and what I'm going to do is just go ahead and true it up. Now you'll notice that the word body is reading in the wrong direction. That's because this is the end where I'm going to need my tenon and threads, and this will be the back end of the pen. What I want to do is true this up to fit into my 20mm collet so that I can flip it around and take care of truing up and drilling, tapping, and threading the opposite end. I've got the blank turned down to 19.83 millimeters. My collet is a 20mm collet, so it should fit perfectly. Now let's true up the opposite end to roughly the same dimension. Let's true up the end of our blank so that it's nice and square. While I've got the blank on the lathe, I'm going to go ahead and drill a 13mm hole, probably about a 1/2 inch deep into the blank. I decided to use pen jaws to turn this blank down to 13mm, and the reason why is I did not want to remove my blank from the collet chuck and take a chance at when I put it back it wasn't perfectly centered. That way when I'm done with this I can just put the collet chuck right back on the lathe and everything should align properly. I've got my resin turned down to 13mm and it fits nicely inside of the Hackberry blank. It's a good tight fit, so when I glue it in it's going to hold really well. I'm going to go ahead and get this parted off. We'll get it glued into the blank. We'll come back and cut it to the proper length, and then we'll recut the threads on our tenon. Got some medium CA glue. I'm going to go ahead and coat around the inside of my blank. Get quite a bit of glue in there. And I'm going to take my plug and we're going to thread it in. It's going to get a little bit messy here, I think. Let me get a piece of paper towel. There we go. I thought it might. I put a little more than I meant to, but let's get that out of the way. And there we go. I'm not worried about the excess CA glue. I just don't want to get it all over my collet chuck. Take a look at that. I'll tell you what, let's put this on the lathe and let's just make sure that it spins true, and then that looks pretty darn true to me. Let me hit it with a little bit of activator. I've reset my calipers to 5/16 of an inch, and I'm just going to go ahead and score my blank right there. Bring our pencil up and we will make a mark all the way around the blank. Let's go ahead and get our parting tool and we'll clean that off and put a little bit of a relief on the back. I'll start off with just a little bit of mineral oil. I'm going to try not to get it all over the wood because it'll soak in. Try to keep it just on the tenon. And now let's cut some threads. I've reversed my die. I'm going to go ahead and just chase the threads. Brought my cap back over. And now we catch the threads immediately. Got plenty of thread and we get a super tight fit. That's going to work real nice. And see how true that is? I'm going to go ahead and start a hole down the center of this tenon so that I can drill true with my bit. I brought my tap over, and this tap is tapered. So as I run it down through this tenon, I want to make sure that the threads on the back of the tap go all the way through the tenon so that I know I've cut the proper depth threads for my section to screw into. So what I'm going to do is take my calipers and I'm going to zero them out, and then I'm going to come back this way. I'm going to touch the tip of the tap, and then I'm going to touch the tip of the tenon. And it looks like I'm going to go in about 30.13 centimeters. I've chucked up an S-bit and I've marked 30.13 centimeters on the bit. We're just going to drill down into the blank until we reach this mark. I've got my tap in my tap and die holder, and I'm ready to go ahead and cut my threads. Now I'm going to cut very slowly, and I'm going to not put any mineral oil on my tap simply because I don't want to saturate my blank with the mineral oil. And on past pins, you've noticed I drilled much deeper, a little over 2 inches into the blank. What I decided to do with this one is just drill deep enough to accept the tap, and then I'll come back and I'll drill to the proper depth with a smaller bit to accept my ink refill. I want to use a bit that is closer to the size, the diameter of the ink refill, so that it doesn't wobble around inside of the blank. So we'll see a little more on that as we move forward. But let's go ahead and cut the threads on the inside of our blank. We're almost to the end. We're going to go ahead and run this in till it bottoms out, and that will ensure that we have the perfect diameter threads all the way down to the end of the tenon. With the threads cut, I'm going to go ahead and test the fit with a section that I already have made up. So far, it's threading very nicely. And we've got a nice tight fit. That looks really good. I brought an ink refill over to my blank. I'm going to slide it in. I'm going to add my section. And what I need to do is I need to drill into the blank to a depth of about 29.89 millimeters. That way, when this section is seated against this tenon, this blank will fit tightly inside of the body of my pen, and it won't move forward and backwards as you're writing. It should hold pretty steady. I took my drill bit and I ran it all the way up into the blank until it touched the bottom of the blank. Brought my calipers over and I measured off 29.89 millimeters. What I'm going to do is go ahead and drill the hole. I am going to drill just shy of my mark. We're going to test, and then we're going to sneak up on that mark because I don't want to overshoot and then have my ink refill be sloppy inside of the pen. Okay, one more try. Let's see what we've got. Oh, that seats nicely against the shoulder. There's no play in the ink, which is what we want. That's absolutely perfect. I'm super happy with that. Now, what I want to do is, this is the time, keep you a notebook when you do this and record this information. I mean, I know how big the tenon needs to be. I know what bit to use to drill it out, but now we know the size of the bit to drill a perfect hole for our Parker ink refill, as well as we know the depth. And I'll show you how we're going to grab the depth. I've brought my calipers over and I've zeroed them out. We're going to take the calipers and we're going to stick the end of the calipers into the blank, and we're going to let it go all the way to the back of the blank, the very bottom. We're going to lock it down, and we're going to see that that depth is 62.34 millimeters. So now we're going to get that recorded in our Bespoke book. I've got another piece of my blank chucked up. This one's marked section. Now this will be the end of the section where the ink will protrude. This will be the part that threads into my blank. So I'm going to go ahead and get a 20 millimeter tenon on this end so I can grip it in my collet chuck, and then we'll flip it around and go ahead and start getting our holes drilled and taking care of the business end of this that needs to thread into the body of our pen. A quick note, and this hit me after the fact, in the future, when you have a blank like this, it might be easier to go ahead and turn the whole blank down to 20 millimeters and then cut it into sections so you don't have to waste time, putting on your pin jaws and trying to turn this to fit after the fact. So that's definitely something, that's a lesson I've learned. I've got my tenon turned down to the right diameter. It fits nicely inside the collet chuck, so we're ready to flip it around. Let's turn down the opposite end to a matching diameter. I've chucked up the remainder of my resin, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it down to a 10 millimeter diameter rod that I can use to thread my section into the body of my pen. I've got my tenon turned down to 10 millimeters. I'm ready to go ahead and part it off. We're going to drill a starter hole down the center of our blank. I've got my hole started, but I realized something, and that is I haven't trued up the face of my blank. So we're going to do that real quickly. I'm ready to drill a hole for my tenon. I've chucked up a 10 millimeter bit, and I've got a mark on the end of the bit to let me know just how deep I want to drill. A quick test with our piece shows a nice tight fit. Go ahead and get some medium CA in here. Sorry about getting that out of camera. But I just basically put medium CA in the bottom, and I'm going to stick my little piece of Alumilite in there. Force it down. Make sure it's seated nicely. I brought a section over to my blank to test, and as I lay it against this tenon, I've got about a 1/16 of an inch before I touch the blank. So I'm going to face this off, and that should get me pretty darn close to this tenon being the same length as this one. I've got an M101 die in my tap and die holder. I'm going to apply just a tiny bit of mineral oil to my Alumilite shoulder or tenon, and we're going to go ahead and cut some threads. We've bottomed out. Let's back the die off. We'll flip it around and cut the threads from the other direction. They look really nice. I brought the body of my pen over. Let's test. That is a super fit. Check that out. That's going to be awesome. I'm going to drill a 7/64 inch hole all the way through my blank. 7/64 is the diameter of the nib of a Parker refill. I need to drill a 15/32 inch hole down the center of my section, but I only need to drill deep enough to accommodate the thickness of this Parker refill. So we know that the shoulder of the section is going to butt against this threaded tenon on the body. So something like that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to measure the distance from here to the tenon, and then I'm going to measure the distance of this tenon. We'll add the two together, and that's how far into the blank we're going to drill so that this Parker refill will seat nicely inside of our section. I'm going to call that 11. It's a little over 11 millimeters, but I'd rather come up a little short and have to, tap it just a tiny bit deeper. So we've got 11 millimeters, and this tenon is, looks like about 11.79. So I think we're going to go about 22.5 millimeters into the blank. We'll stop, we'll check, and if we need to, we'll go a little bit deeper. I've set my calipers for 22.5 millimeters, and I'm going to lay them against my bit, and I'm going to lay them right at the cutting edge. You'll see I've got this little sort of a convex section there, and I'm not going to worry about that because the Parker refill has a convex section, and we are coming up short on our distance, so I think we'll be okay. But I'm going to come back here, make a mark on my bit. I'm ready to go ahead and test the refill inside of the section. It got tight right there. Looks like we've got about a 1/16 of an inch that we need to go just a little bit deeper. So we're going to back this off, and we're going to cut it just a tiny bit deeper. There's so much on and off with the camera filming these little sections that I didn't realize I didn't turn the camera on for that last little bit, but I think you understand what I'm doing. And we're just going to pop this in here, and we're going to thread it on. And we seat nicely, very nicely, right against the shoulder of the section. I'm going to go ahead and get my section off of the lathe, and I'm going to install a mandrel in my collet chuck, and then the mandrel will thread onto the back end of our section and allow us to go ahead and shape this to the desired shape and get it cut to the proper length to make the perfect section for the end of our pen. With my blank turned down to more of a proper diameter, I've got a little bit of a lip here at the back next to the mandrel, but I'm not going to worry about that because I think I'll take that out as I sand and shape. So I'm going to go ahead and bring a section over, and I'm going to use this as a model. And when I first brought it over, I laid it against the blank like this. And I thought, wow, I got plenty of room at the end. That's going to be great. And then I realized, hey, Bob, the threads are actually in the mandrel. So if you back it up, you can see I've got a ton of room. But I'm not going to bother taking that off. I'm going to leave it on the blank for stability. One thing I am going to do, if you look at this section, it has a very long cone. I want to make the grip a little bit larger. My hand is big, and a larger grip would be more comfortable. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to come down, and I'm just going to add about 1/4 of an inch to the grip. And then the cone, I'll still have probably 3/4 of an inch on the cone, and that should be plenty for the nib of the ink refill to poke through the end of my section. So we're gonna get this transferred around the blank. Get my pencil on there. And then we're going to begin working on this section, the grip section of our section, and we're going to give it a little bit of a concave appearance, and then we'll come back and work on the cone. The end of my cone is right here. I'm going to actually back that up a little bit. And the reason why is when I turned this one, I noticed that the ink refill sticks through a little farther than I would like. So I'm going to make it a little bit longer, and it's really easy just to shave down the end of this section. So I'd rather have too much and have to remove it than cut it too short the first time through. Oh, look at that. We're there. We're a little uneven. I got a little piece there that needs to be cleaned up. It's just a little, there we go. It was just a little twiggy piece. I'm not going to use the tool anymore. I'm going to go to sanding because with wood, as I sand this down, I can basically clean the end of this up much easier and much nicer than I can with my tool. There we go. Look at that. It's a really nice fit against the tenon. I'm really happy with that. That looks really cool. All right, let me get it back on the lathe and we'll just do a little bit of sanding. I'm going to start off with a piece of 220 for sanding because I just don't want to get too aggressive and take too much off. I've got my sanding finished. I'm ready to clean this with some DNA and put a little bit of CA glue on it. But before I do, I want to test it and make sure it works well with the rest of the pen. Let me back the camera out a little bit. There we go. We'll put the section onto the body of our pen. Fits nice. The ink protrudes through a decent amount. I've got a cap here from another pen, and we'll test that. That's going to be really nice. Got a nice fit. The threads work well. I've got a larger grip area on my section, which for me works perfectly. And I've got just the right amount of nib sticking through the end of my pen. I'm really happy with this. So we're going to go ahead and get some finish on our section so that it's ready to go, and then we'll finish up the rest of the pen. I put a little crystal clear paste wax on my tenon so that the CA glue wouldn't stick to it. I'm going to go ahead now, clean this with some DNA, and put a finish. I'm not going to bother showing any of that on video because, you know, if you've followed any of my videos, you've seen me do it 1,000 times, but I'll be back in a minute and we'll start working on the cap of our pen. I just got done applying CA, and I am super happy with how this section looks. It's just gorgeous. I'm going to go ahead and micro mesh it, buff it up, and I can't wait to see what this pen looks like when it's completely done. That's just absolutely beautiful. I took a little break from turning my pen, and I made this mandrel. This mandrel is designed to work specifically with the body of a Bespoke pen that will accept a Parker refill. And if we slide this in, it's a nice tight fit through the back of the blank. There's a lot of threads, really more threads than I need, but I'm not too worried about that. They will support the inside of this blank just fine. And with that, we'll turn this on. You can see it's running true. I'm ready to start turning and shaping the body of my pen. I was getting ready to put the tool to the blank, And something occurred to me. On this particular blank, I would really like the cap to be postable. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and turn the cap, get it turned to proper shape and size, and then as we start to work on this blank and start to taper it down, I can use the cap to test so that it is postable on the end of the pin. We're going to start once again by truing up our blank to fit into our collet chuck. In order to be able to put threads inside of my cap, I'm going to have to put a sleeve in the cap first. I've got a bit that is 12.7 millimeters, and I'm going to go ahead and turn this down to that diameter. We'll drill a hole in the end of our cap, glue this in, and then we'll go ahead and tap it and thread it to fit the body of our pin. I need to throw a special thank you out to Chris Buxton. Chris is the gentleman who sent me several rods of material that I could use to turn whatever I want out of, but he also sent me a bunch of cutoffs that were 2-3 inches long, and those cutoffs are what I have used on this project to make this pin work. So thank you, Chris. I greatly appreciate you sending me those cutoffs. They have saved me on this project. I have this blank down to the perfect diameter. Now what I want to do is go ahead and cut a plug off of the blank. In order to make that plug, I had to take this out of the collet chuck, and now when you turn the lathe on, you can see that it's spinning a little off balance. I tried my best to realign it. In the future, I'll go ahead and turn the plug first, and then I'll trim this down to the proper diameter. But what I want to do now is go ahead, I'm just going to run the tool across this and just true it back up. I'm going to put a starter hole in the end of the blank so that we can come back and drill the final hole for the plug. I've made a mark on the end of my bit for the proper depth for my plug, and we're ready to go ahead and drill it out. And we're going to go ahead and use a little medium CA glue, and we're going to get this plug glued into our blank. I want to face off the end of my blank, get it nice and square. There's also just a little bit of a dimple on the end of that plug, so we're going to clean all that up. I'm going to drill a 12 millimeter hole down the center of this blank. This particular bit has a little needle that sort of starts it, so I've chosen a really small centering bit. I'm going to go ahead and get a hole started, then we'll come back and drill it out with the 12 millimeter bit. I measured from the shoulder of my pin out to the tip of my nib, and it was actually about 45 millimeters. So I went ahead and made it 46. That way the nib, the ball on the nib, doesn't touch the inside of the cap. And I brought my bit out and I went ahead and made that marking on my bit. So if I drill to this point, this should give me just enough room to be able to cap my pin without the ball of the ink cartridge touching the inside of the cap. I've got my M13.8 tap in my tap and die holder, and I'm ready to go ahead and put some threads on the inside of my cap. I don't know if you saw this or not, but right here, there's a tiny crack. My blank started to crack apart. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a clamp on here. I'm going to soak the outside of this in several coats of thin CA to let it soak down in there and hopefully glue the piece back together. You don't really see the crack when it's together, and I think you won't be able to see it when the pin is finished. I'll also put some CA on the inside to help that. Then we'll come back and re-tap this once the CA has thoroughly dried. I'm going to let that dry naturally, no activator, because I want it to really soak in. I've got the inside of the blank glued up as well, just letting it set and dry, and hopefully we'll be able to re-tap this again in a moment. I'm ready to test the threads, so I brought the body of my pin over with the nib installed, and we're going to thread it into the cap and see just how it fits. Oh, very nice. Look at that. That is awesome. With the body of the pin installed in the cap, I'm going to take my tool and make a couple of very light passes just to level this out, and then we can use our mandrels and turn both of these down to the proper dimensions. I got really brave and I went ahead and shaped my pin quite heavily. I love the shape on the back of this pin. We just need to clean it off a little bit and make sure that it's going to be postable. And then I need to get the cap section flipped around so that I can clean up the other end of the cap. If we remove it from the cap, You can see we've got a really nice little lip right there. It's going to be a very comfortable pen to write with. Well, guys, this pen just came to a very quick ending. I loosened up my collet chuck and I grabbed the end of the pen to pull it out of the chuck. It's still pretty tight in there, so when I pulled on it, I squeezed a little too hard, and basically I crushed the cap to my pen. Well, I'm very disappointed. After all the work I put into this pen, I already have this sanded to 400. All I needed to do was clean the end of it up to get rid of that dimple, and then use a little denatured alcohol and some CA glue to finish it. I am going to go ahead in this video and finish the body of this pen, but I wanted to show you where I was at. Take a look at that. It's perfectly postable, which I was happy about. The threads are awesome. It would have made an incredible pen. What happened to me, and the reason why I broke it is, you might remember I had the crack on the cap, and I filled it with CA. CA had run back into the collet, and it had glued the cap to the collet. So whenever I loosened the collet up and I grabbed the cap, normally you can pull it out, it was kind of tight. So I squeezed a little harder, and not thinking that it was incredibly thin, literally crushed like an egg the cap in my hand. I took the collet chuck off of the lathe and I used one of the bars, the Tommy bars, and was able to tap from the back a few times, and it loosened up and the cap came on out. I will not have a cap for this pen, but we are going to go ahead and clean the back end up. We're going to make sure it remains postable, and we are going to get this pen finished so that the project is not a total loss. Well, of course I didn't have the camera running, but all I did is I fired this up, I used a parting tool, and I cut the end off of this blank far enough back to where the dimple from the live center is no longer on the blank. Now what I'm going to do is grab my sandpaper and I'm going to sand and shape this down a little farther so that I can make sure my cap seats. I'd like it to come a little farther down on the pen. It's just really seating only on the very end, so I'd like it to come down to maybe about here. I'll use a little sandpaper to do that. I've got my blank sanded down. That's perfect. That's exactly what I wanted for a postable pen. I'm going to go ahead now, clean this with some denatured alcohol, and we're going to get a CA finish on it. I just finished applying my last coat of CA glue. I think this pen body looks amazing. I'm going to go ahead and micro mesh it and buff it up. I think this pen turned out absolutely fantastic. I'm so disappointed that I broke the cap because it's a beautiful pen. It's incredibly comfortable in the hand and it's a perfect length. It's postable, which is something I hadn't done before. And it just broke my heart when I crushed it, but I really am happy with how this pen turned out. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. It all started off with my good buddy Mike DeLawter swinging by the shop and dropping off this gorgeous Spalted Hackberry blank that he stabilized. And speaking of stabilizing, this is a collaboration video with Michael. And he does a video. I've already seen it because it's on YouTube privately right now. He's going to be releasing it at the same time I release this video. But I need you guys to jump over and check this out. I have thought many times about getting into stabilizing, but I didn't really have a clue what it was about or how it worked. He does a phenomenal job walking through the process step by step. Here's the equipment, here's the process, here's how it works, here's the result. It was absolutely fantastic. So take a few minutes, check out his video. I'm going to put a link in the comment section below. I would really like to thank you for joining me today for this video. Despite the unfortunate event of crushing the cap, I really had an awesome time making this. It took a little bit of outside the box thinking for me, which I always enjoy a good challenge, and I love the pen. So let me tell you, if you guys have an idea for a nice piece of contrasting wood that would work well with this blank, leave it in the comments below, because I am going to come back and I am going to turn a cap for this. It's just a matter of deciding what type of wood would be the best to do it. Have a great day, everybody. I want you to know that you are always welcome in my shop, so come back and see me again real soon. Take care.